So again, thanks everybody for logging on. And I also want to introduce the rest of the IEF staff that's on the call with us this morning. We have Deborah Olson, who's our executive director, here with us. And
hi, everyone.
And also we have Sarah Conley, who's our conservation coordinator. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and she is going to start the presentation and introduce our speakers for us. So thank you. Take it away, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to see you all, and thank you so much for being here. We are so happy to have another one of our conservation chats. We have some amazing guests today. Just a couple reminders, like Julie said, if you're not asking a question, please keep yourself on mute, and maybe to conserve bandwidth, you can even turn off your video depending. Just remember that if your video's on, we can see what you're doing. So one of the fun things about technology. But to move forward, today we are so proud to have our conservation chat guests, Elizabeth Ross and Emily Otali. Elizabeth has worked in Africa for almost 40 years, first in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then in Uganda for the last 30, focusing on the communities around Kibale National Park, which is the last forest in East Africa that is home to a healthy population of both elephants and great apes. Together with Ugandan colleagues, Elizabeth and her husband founded the Kasiisi Project, which partners with the Kibale Forest Schools Program to conserve the Kibale Forest and its iconic wildlife. Then our other guest, Emily Otali, is actually the first African woman to attain a PhD on chimpanzees. She's the country director of the Kibale Forest Schools Program, and they provide programs to support education, health, and care for the environment. She also serves as the field director for Kibale Chimpanzee Project and the co-director of the Kibale Snare Removal Project. These are amazingly accomplished and busy women. In addition to all of their dedication to elephants and wildlife, both are proud mothers. So we are so happy to have them. IEF has supported their work for multiple years, bringing conservation programming to over 8,000 rural children and their communities, centering on 16 governmental primary schools in order to help build a new generation of committed conservationists. We could not be more honored with their presence. So I will let them take it away and talk to you about all their great work.
Okay, thank you very much. Emily, you're muted. I don't know if you want to be. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, okay, all right. So I'm going to share the screen with you. We're going to show you some slides and we're going to talk about what we do. And I'm going to do a couple of introductory slides, and then Emily's going to describe our program because she does most of the work. Right. Okay. So we work in western Uganda, close to the Congo border, and we're a collaborative project, cross-continental collaborative project. The Kasiisi Project is based in the US. It's a 501c3, and we're the fundraising arm, but also we advise and we provide help and we design projects. The Kibale Forest Schools Program is the actual boots on the ground organization that carries out the programs that we have jointly agreed on. So Kibale National Park is a very special place. As Sarah said, we claim that it's the last forest in East Africa that has healthy populations of great apes, in this case chimps, and elephants. But if anybody knows that of somewhere else, that they disagree with us and they know of somewhere else, we would be delighted to hear. So originally it was the hunting ground of the local Toro kings. It became a forest reserve, and then it became a national park. And it's an extremely important biodiversity hotspot. It's a mid-range tropical forest. It has more than 400 elephants. It's got more than 1,500 chimpanzees, over 375 bird species, and a total of 13 different primate species, including the chimps. At one time, in the 1960s, Kibale Forest was said to have the densest population of elephants in Africa. By the 1980s, when we first arrived in Uganda, you rarely saw them, but they have come back with a wallop. And I think Emily will agree with me that the field assistants who go out into the forest to follow the chimpanzees bump into elephants a lot these days. And I just wanted to add that these are a mix of savanna elephants and forest elephants. So about a third, based on DNA analysis of dung, about a third of the elephants are forest elephants, about a third are savanna elephants, and about a third are a mix. So our goal is to do our best to conserve these animals, and that isn't very easy because they are both dangerous and extremely destructive. So I'm going to pass over to Emily, and she's going to talk about the ways that we try and build a better relationship between the communities, the Uganda Wildlife Authority, and us in order to help promote the idea that we have here in the States that it's worth living alongside dangerous animals. And of course, in the States, that's a matter up for discussion. There isn't everybody who loves wolves. So thank you very much. And Emily, you just tell me to advance the slides, okay?
Okay, so the next one, please.
It's up. Can you not see it?
No, I'm still seeing yours.
You're seeing me?
No, I'm still seeing your screen. I'm still seeing Kibale National. Now it's on.
Okay.
Okay, hi everyone. No problem. So first of all, we'll talk about the conservation challenges that we face. The number one challenge, of course, is poverty. In 2012, there was an 18% increase in poverty among rural farmers. So we are in a rural setting close to the forest, and lack of education. Generally, 77% of the children in these communities do not advance to secondary school. So primary school is compulsory by government law, but after that, parents are supposed to pay school fees for their children to advance to secondary school. And 77% of our rural children do not go to school. And because of poverty and lack of education, people remain within the community, and they tend to look at the forest as a free resource. So they want to cut trees for timber, or for poles, for building, or for firewood, or for charcoal burning. And when they go into the forest, it encourages them to carry all sorts of poaching with pit traps and snares and net hunting. The other emerging conservation challenge that is really big is the transfer of zoonotic diseases between humans and animals, especially the flu or the common cold that easily catches some of the primates, especially chimpanzees. And again, because of proximity to the forest, there is a big human-elephant conflict. So the elephants come out of the forest to go and crop raid, which brings resentment from the people whose crops have been raided. And on the other hand, because of the increasing elephant population, people are setting pit traps and snares. Elizabeth, that might be the next slide.
How long can you see it yet?
Yeah, it's good. So these are pit traps and slide and snares set for elephants. You can see the pit trap with a spear in it. So if an elephant falls in it, it falls to its death. So this is the kind of conflict, that arises from people living close to the forest, and also the elephant population increasing. The other conservation challenge is habitat loss. which again leads to more conflict because the forest is hugely surrounded by crops, and so there is no room for regrowth of the forest. Finally, of course, the COVID pandemic brought for us a huge challenge in terms of promoting our conservation education, because schools have remained closed since March 2020. So we've had to devise ways of reaching out to the learners. So the Kibale Forest Schools Program, with funding from numerous sources, does a lot of conservation work. One of it is community-based conservation. So we promote good health by supporting Uganda Wildlife Authority's mobile clinic and conducting health education in all our schools. You know, health education can be as basic as teaching the children how to wash their hands to lessons on reproductive health. We also promote good schools in our community by supporting construction of things like latrines, classroom blocks, libraries. And recently, we've even tried to advance more conservation education in the community through citizen science, where we are involving the farmers themselves in participating in conservation, like the bee farmers participating in the iNaturalist. So they are watching what the bees are feeding on and taking pictures and posting it on iNaturalist. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. Next slide. Okay, thank you. So this is the citizen science staff. You see the beehives in the forest edge and the iNaturalist app. Next slide. It hasn't come. Okay, thank you. However, our main goal is conservation education. We are a conservation education organization, and we aim to conserve Kibale National Park and its resident wildlife. So all our activities that we do are a necessary support to our main activity of conservation education. We work with wildlife clubs from our 16 schools that we work with. All the 16 schools are within 5 kilometers of Kibale Forest. And because of the huge population of 8,000 children, we cannot work with each one of them individually. And that's why we work with wildlife clubs and promote peer-to-peer education. Conservation education, though, is a long-term strategy. And because it normally does not give immediate results. However, getting funding for this kind of activity is very difficult. And that's why we are grateful to the International Elephant Foundation for continuing to A, believe in us, and B, support some of the programs. For example, the crayons for Kibale, which was a very recent funding, it helped us a lot because we had to devise ways of getting to the children in the villages with activities, be it conservation or just school related. And they didn't have things as simple as crayons or sets to work with. And so the International Elephant Foundation helped fundraise for us to get these and send to the local children. Is there another slide? No.
That's it.
Thank you.
So we just want to wrap up by saying that we've been doing this now for over 20 years, that one of the critical things about any of these kind of conservation programs is that you involve the community, because if they don't trust you, you're not going to get anywhere. And also the fact that we've been there for so long and we're deeply embedded in the community has really helped gain the trust of the local people. And our staff are all Ugandans and most of them are locals. And so the local community understands that we understand their challenges. They're not idiots, and they understand that when they cut down trees and you get erosion and poor water, but they will tell you that they need to put food on the table tonight. So it's really critical that you work alongside people and you allow them to understand that you're not judging them, that you understand that they have challenges, and can we work together on this to make it better, which is one of the mission behind the Bee Project, because the Bee Project is designed to help prevent elephant conflict, stop them coming into the fields. But in order to do that, you need active hives. And the problem with hives along the forest edge is that they're not very active. And so we have this program using chips that are inserted into the hives that allow us to set baselines for bee health and measure bee health and what the best bees are, and hopefully increase the efficacy of the beehive fences in deterring elephants coming into the fields. In Kibale, it's very, it has a lot of streams and a lot of swamps, and you cannot dig trenches through streams. And so if you can dig elephant trenches and then you can bridge between them across the streams and swamps with beehives, that's our aim. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. That was a great overview of everything you guys are doing. So now, if there's any questions in the chat, and why we let people sort of think about all the great things they just heard about, I'll ask you some stuff. So you emphasize the importance of good education as a conservation tool. Can one of you explain further what your project does to help make the schools you work with better, and how you emphasize conservation as that tool?
Emily.
Okay. So like I told you before, 77% of the rural children are not progressing to secondary school. And so there's no point in teaching them conservation education and not giving them tools to depend on other activities other than the forest. So what we do is we get excelling students from all our primary schools and give them scholarships to go on to secondary schools because their parents can't afford to take them to secondary school. So we have scholarships from 4 years to 6 years, and if they can go to university and then go on and do professional courses so that they don't go back to the forest. And since the onset of the project, we've had over how many students, Elizabeth? 100 and?
About 180 now.
About 180 students, lawyers, doctors, nurses, teachers, who we are very sure will never go back to the forest to poach.
And I think one of the important things about this is that in Uganda, the culture demands that members of the family who are earning a salary help their brothers and sisters and their cousins. And so you have one person who's earning a reasonable salary and they can pull along with them into secondary school and on other members of their family. So it has a really broad impact. And hopefully, as Emily said, they won't go back to progressively smaller and less fertile patches of land. And then, of course, when things get tough, and this has been one of the issues around COVID, they go into the forest and they extract resources from the forest, and elephants are super valuable. So, it's a huge temptation, and they're stamping all over your crops. So it's tough.
So you bring up COVID. How have you seen things change, or how have you guys had to adapt because of the pandemic?
In the beginning, the immediate reaction to COVID was shut down everything, and the poachers saw that so fast. So the number of snares increased by almost 1,000%, and Uganda Wildlife Authority went into absolute panic to get back people to patrol and remove snares in the forest. But people also lost jobs, and so it just kind of increased the poverty because everybody was at home not working and they didn't have food to feed on. And of course, children staying at home. We've had our teenage pregnancy just went up. I think it was reported in the news the other day that there were 53,000 teenage mothers just from the COVID season. So, in Uganda, when you get pregnant, you're expelled from school. And now government is thinking of ways of forgiving these girls so that they can go back to school, maybe change school so that they're not, judged by their peers. So COVID has just disorganized everything. It's shocking that everyone is saying, open the school so that the children can go back to the school. And the Minister of Education says, where are they safest? Are they safest at school or at home?
I mean, one of the statistics I saw was that child labor has been put back 20 years in Uganda because, and early marriage, because if you have, it's important. Children can bring in money. You marry a girl, your daughter off, someone else has to feed her, and you also get bride price for her. And then once these kids are working, they almost never come back to education. So, all children suffer from lack of school, but in marginalized communities like ours, they suffer particularly, and girls suffer worst of all. And all this sort of, compounds to make conservation of less concern, and the problems around poaching and resource extraction from the forest go up.
Yeah, I mean, because if you can't meet human needs, why would anyone deal with wildlife needs and conservation? So we have some questions in the chat. You guys mentioned the Uganda Wildlife Authority being pretty upset about the increase in snares. Can you talk about your relationship with them, or if you guys work with them at all?
Emily, you should answer these questions. You're on the ground.
Okay, you can always chime in if I could forget something. We work in the national park, and Uganda Wildlife Authority has the mandate to protect all national parks in Uganda. So they are ultimately our bosses. With extremely tight hands, they were the first to, what's the word used? Follow their staff. And the first people that had to be dropped were rangers. Because of the pandemic, they rely hugely on tourism. And because of the lockdown around the world, we were not receiving tourists anymore. So they say, we're going to cut down our staff. And so everything we do has to be A, with their blessing, and B, in collaboration with them. So, when we go to carry out conservation education activities, we go with the Uganda Wildlife Authority rangers, and they do sometimes support all our grant proposals that we write. And so we work with the anti-poaching or the law enforcement group. We supplement them with some staff that we pay to patrol in the forest, and they go with the armed rangers. Have I forgotten something, Elizabeth?
I don't think so. I would just re-emphasize that a good relationship with the Uganda Wildlife Authority is critical, and we never assume anything. We're very careful to get their approval and their collaboration, and we've had a very good relationship with them. I don't think we've ever had problems with them, have we, Emily? We have a member,
no.
Our Ugandan board. We always have a member of the Uganda Wildlife Authority on that board, it's been quite successful.
Thank you. So someone else is asking about, I guess, human lifespan in Uganda, how long people live, and kind of maybe talk about, I guess, because it seems like, obviously life in Uganda is going to be quite different than life in the United States and in the UK. So I bet life is a little shorter and things are a little bit more challenging.
Yes, it was very short a few years ago. I think it was 30 years because of HIV. I remember when I turned 30, I celebrated so hard because I had passed the mark. But now, because there was a really vigorous education on HIV/AIDS, I think the life span went to 47 for men and 49 for women. Elizabeth, you might know these figures
Yeah,
better.
it might even be a little bit higher than that, but it's around 50,
Okay.
I think now.
Yeah.
And of course, because of antiretroviral drugs, people live with HIV, for years. It's become a chronic disease. And that's made a big difference. But of course, it means that the population is growing really rapidly, and that's another issue because we have this forest that we work in is an island forest. It's this little island in the middle of, miles and miles and miles of farmland and tea plantations, and the population is just growing and growing and pushing up. I mean, since we started working there in 1987, it's actually improved slightly. Numbers of various animals have increased, well, certainly elephants and also chimps to a certain extent and other animals, and they've held the boundaries. But when you think that the population of Uganda, over 50% are under 15, Emily? Under 16? I mean, they haven't even
15.
started having babies yet. The pressures haven't even begun. So that's why, although when you have a really critical issue like elephants that are threatened everywhere, and you need quick fixes, because if you take too long, they may be gone by the time you figure it out. But on the other hand, you do need education, because people need to understand why what they have is so special, and be hopefully, when they have choices, they'll make good choices that are good for them and good for the animals around them. Without that education, why would you bother? So that's always the challenge for those of us who work in conservation education, which has become, in the last few years, progressively less popular. So it's much harder now to get conservation education funding. And I understand why, but it's really critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I think making that point to the general public, to the people who would be funding it, is crucial. But it's, like you said, it's a little bit more nuanced and more difficult to describe. So we have someone in the chat asking about the elephant traps and photos that you showed. They said elephant traps are gruesome. Are they common? Do you know how many elephants are killed by those each year? How do you get rid of them?
Unfortunately, the numbers are increasing. 5 years ago, we found one, and now it could be, I tell you what, the chief park warden told me that in 2019, they had 173 of them. And sometimes you find elephants that have already died in there. They don't give a number. Sometimes we find them before the elephants have found them. And when we find them, burying the hole again takes 14 man-days. So it's a huge job. But yeah, the numbers are increasing, and it's very hard to tell. So we've found some of them with elephant carcasses. Sometimes I think they just come and remove the ivory and leave the elephant there.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So we have another question. We a lot of our people today in the chat are from different animal organizations and different zoos. We have someone who says, I was a member of the CAN grant committee a couple years back, and I remember the beehive fence proposal. Are there statistics on how effective they are when they are active? If not, a general idea of the effectiveness would work.
Well, they're used in a lot of places. I mean, they're quite popular, and people. I think the thing is that elephants, if what is on the other side of the fence is good enough and they're hungry enough, they'll just go through it. What we hear back, we have no good data. I know that a Ugandan colleague of ours has put up camera traps to try and film what happens when they come up to the fences, but the elephants don't like them, and they destroy them, and chimps destroy them too. So that's hard. But anecdotally, people tell you, yes, you know, since we put up this beehive fence, we don't get elephants coming through here anymore. Now, maybe they're going down the road and coming through somewhere else. I don't know. And we don't really know if that's true, but that's certainly what people believe. And one of the things about, I mentioned trenches. So the Uganda Wildlife Authority dig the trenches, but you've got to maintain the trenches because the elephants stand on the edge and they stamp down their feet and they fill them. So one of the deals that this colleague of ours, Oesegere George, made with the beekeepers was, we will give you hives if you maintain the trenches. So it's important for the elephants in Kibale National Park that these beehive fences work. And it's important that that people want to put them up. And the big issue is that African bees abscond, probably because there's no winter to kill off parasites and things. So what you need is a stable apiary. You need enough bees to be active so that when the elephants come, they got their trunks and they're a real pain in the neck, but not so many that there's not enough honey for the people who are running the apiaries to harvest. So our project we're the only project in Africa that uses these broodminder hive monitors, is to get a really good idea of what we need to do to make those hives as optimal as possible. You know, this is another long-term issue, but Emily went down to Queen Elizabeth National Park recently, and you saw the beehives there, and they're along the park edge, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I know you said that they were producing a lot of honey. Did they talk to you about how effective they were with the elephants?
No, unfortunately not. We just had economic conversations, which I think is also, when they get the honey and sell the honey, it kind of reduces the interest to go out and poach, so hopefully it can be two-pronged: keep away the elephants, give them enough economic livelihood to discourage them from going to the forest or from poaching.
I mean, Emily mentioned the citizen science portion of this, and what we've done is that we've actually given the beekeepers smartphones, and they download all the information from the chips in the hives and upload it to the cloud, and then they're extremely engaged in this. They really like it. They want to know what's going on in their hives. They're really excited about this, and so it's been a really wonderful community project that everybody is coming together, you know, hopefully to help elephants. But for instance, so bees at the end of their, if they go into the wet season, they're not foraging as much. So they eat the honey in the hives. So when it comes to the dry season, when they go out and they make lots of honey, the first bit of that time, they're making up for the honey that they ate during the wet season. So we've started feeding them. If we feed them during the wet season, then they're all ready to go once the flowers all come out, and then you get a much better yield. But we have, I think, 7 different apiaries along the forest edge that are working with us right now, and we're hoping to increase that number. I mean, very little is known about African bees. So,
wow, that's fascinating. So we have another follow-up question about the beehive fences. Other than those fences, what other methods are being used to keep elephants kind of away from crops or human settlements that in your region?
Other method. Most times what happens is people just stay out to guard their crops at night, which is really, you know, painful and difficult. And sometimes they get so angry, they'll go and wake the chief park warden up and say, come for your elephants, come take them away. And maybe the rangers will come and shoot in the air to chase the elephants back into the forest. But elephants are very clever. If they're really determined, they'll just stand at the forest edge and wait for the hoo-ha to calm down, and then they'll go back in. But there's no other way other than just chasing them back in.
And the trenches. The trenches work. Don't you think?
They work if they're maintained.
If they're maintained, yeah. But you're squeezing increasing numbers of elephants into. There is a causeway that goes down into Queen Elizabeth National Park, and the elephants move backwards and forwards between the two national parks. But it's a really tough problem because they do so much damage so quickly.
Absolutely. So we have a follow-up from the person who asked about the beehive fences. Thank you so much for the very informative answer. They seem to be helping in many aspects, but creating a few dilemmas, as most things do. As someone that works with elephants, that sounds accurate. If they are hungry enough, they will find a way. So yeah. You are already getting good feedback from your excellent answers. So I know that we have other kinds of animal keepers here. And Emily, I understand that as well as directing the Kibale Forest Schools Program, you're also the director of the Kibale Chimpanzee Project. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, so I did my PhD with the Kibale Chimpanzee Project. So Kibale Chimpanzee Project was started in 1987. And we just collect long-term life history and behavioral observation on the Kanyawara community of chimpanzees. So we collect any information from birth or death dates of the chimps to continuous deliberative data on all behaviors that chimps do, from feeding to playing to grooming. And we've had a lot of publications on just everything from aggression rates and female reproductive success and all that. But so that's the behavioral side of the things that we do. But even within the 1980s, they started noticing that chimps were losing their limbs or body parts to snares. And so the snare removal program was started at the same year that the Kasiisi Project started. And so we hire individuals to just go in the forest to purposely look for snares. And once trained, it's very easy for them to tell where a poacher has passed vis-a-vis where a researcher has passed. And they go and collect the snares. And this is how we come across all these photos and elephant pea traps and food traps. So for the snare removal program, we work with Uganda Wildlife Authority, and we also work with the Jane Goodall Institute. They fund some of those activities. And sometimes when chimps are caught on snares, they carry around the snare until we call a vet doctor to come and intervene. So dart the chimp and remove the snare. So we do all that.
That's excellent. Wow. So we're still waiting for more questions from our guests. Everyone, you're welcome to throw in your questions in the chat. In the meantime, can you guys tell us more about what the schools are like? I mean, I realize that they're mostly closed now, but maybe talk about how the schools are different from US and UK schools. If meals are provided, because I know that is definitely an issue, and that kind of thing. What's like the day-to-day experience for school children that we're reaching out to?
I would say that very long days. They get to school at what, 8:30 a.m.
Yeah.
And they have lessons until, what is it, 3 or 3:30, and then they have
3:30.
And then they have after school activities until 4:30 or 5, and then they have to walk home again. And often they have to walk a long distance. The classrooms are huge, not as huge as they used to be, but they're still pretty. I mean, the classes are big, one teacher. They don't provide lunch. We did have a lunch program for a while, but as all these things come with huge challenges, and we've done surveys, and you're never going to get a situation where there are no children who need help. I mean, there's always going to be kids that need help, but the numbers were much, much lower than they had been. And we could tell that by what children were bringing in for lunch. And I think there was Emily, am I right? There was a big push by the government to encourage parents to provide meals. I mean, we had children when we first started this who got a cup of black tea in the morning, and that was it until they went home at night. And somebody said to me, well, if you feed them in the morning, then they're just hungrier in the middle of the day. But of course, it makes them sleepy and lethargic, and so they don't learn very well.
Yeah, and you've talked about the horrible classrooms and lack of benches and
awful latrines.
Yes.
I mean, I would say that people are very excited about fancy electronics. What can fancy electronics do to improve these kids' educational experience? And clearly things like iPads with books on them and things are great, but we don't have toilets. And if you don't have, if the teachers have to share a latrine with the children, they do not come to school. So the kids don't get taught. It's the really basic stuff. And I know I've banged on about how hard it is to get money for conservation education, but you try getting money to build toilets or classrooms, it's almost impossible. Nobody wants to fund infrastructure. And whether it's all those stories about, people in Nepal keeping cows in hospitals, I don't know, but it's very, very difficult. And they'll often, when you see a grant, they will actually say, no construction. But you can't have a school without classrooms. And you don't have teachers if you don't have a staff room, and they don't have decent latrines. So it's the really basic stuff that our schools need. Don't you think, Emily?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Absolutely. So someone in the chat wants to know about how much money does it cost to build one latrine?
About $3,000. So what we focused on have been what we call girl-friendly latrines, because it's always easier to get money for girls. And those latrines have washrooms in them. And you can't tell when you're going in, they're blocked, the entrances are blocked. I mean, they've got racks of cubicles, and then rows of cubicles, and then bathrooms at the washrooms at each end, because the government said all schools have to have washing facilities for girls. And so what they would do is they put up a bit of corrugated iron around a tree in the corner of the schoolyard. And of course, everybody knows if you go there, you have your period, right? So who's going to use them? So, a lot of things with girls is around being able to, being discreet. I mean, walking through a classroom of men to get soap. I mean, the staff rooms, you go get soap from the woman teacher, and you have to walk through a staff room full of men. You don't do it. And one of the things that we've introduced are peer education programs where we train students to be peer counselors, and that's been really good, because if you have your period, you get blood on your skirt, you don't have pads, you need soap or whatever, you don't have to go and say I need it, but you go to your peer counselor and she goes and says I need this for some girl in the class or whatever. So that's been really helpful.
Yeah, wow. So going along with, well, kind of touching on the technology aspect that you brought up, can you talk a little bit about the ideas and the plans of using social networking and social media to achieve faster conservation education gains?
Yes, so this is a project that we're doing with a psychologist who's worked in Kibale for some years at Boston College. And the idea, going back to the issues around conservation education and the time it takes to get anything that you can measure, she came up with this idea that if we could identify what key individuals, and there are good ways of doing this, you can use social network theory to identify key individuals. If we just focus our conservation education program on a few key individuals, will we get as good a spread of the information into the whole school community as we do at the moment? You know, maybe you don't have to teach this stuff to 40 people. You only have to teach it to 3. And then what we would do is we would go out and see if those key individuals came from families that were key families that could also have this kind of influence in their communities. And the International Elephant Foundation funded this project, and then COVID came along. So we haven't been able to do it yet. But I think we think it's got great hopefulness. I mean, one of the things that we did do with the same group at BC is they did conservation education, but they had the children invest in conservation in some way. So at their cost. So if they invested in conservation, they got fewer cookies. And then they ran the conservation education programs, and then they did the tests again. And more children invested in conservation, even at a cost to themselves, than in cookies. So that, again, is a small pilot project, but it's something we'd like to expand because we think that has real possibilities. And it's very difficult to prove that conservation education actually makes a difference. You know, if you're, I don't know, a lot of things you can measure easily in conservation, like the number of trees, or, you know, the number of whatever it is, fish in a pond or whatever. But conservation education is so complex, and the outcomes are so complex because so many things impact it. You know, you get a war in South Sudan, and all the maize gets exported to South Sudan, and nobody has anything to eat. Then that doesn't matter how much conservation education you've done. So it's actually very difficult to measure it.
So just adding to the social network education program, in the beginning, we were really concentrating on only school children and getting a lot of resentment from their parents or from the community. But like Elizabeth said, if we identify influential families in the community and make them participate in this, they're going to see the good of the project. I mean, it's been so many years of people not trusting, but, you know, with the trust developing, now they're beginning to appreciate what we are doing. And I think a few years ago, we went out to the community to ask them if they knew what we were doing with their children. And some of them said, we don't care because we don't see the benefit. But if we take the benefit directly to them, you know, then it increases the interest. And ultimately, the community are the people who are doing the poaching and, you know, need the change more than the children.
Absolutely. Well, I think, you know, families can be the same across the world, right? Your kids can actually influence you, and you influence your kids. So hopefully this kind of education has that cross-generational, you know, bridges that cross-generational divide.
And we certainly see when we do community surveys, very positive responses to our conservation programs. You know, people have this belief that if their child is in the wildlife club and involved in our conservation programs, they do better at school. Now, we don't know whether the kids that join the wildlife clubs are doing better at school anyway, but a lot of the parents really believe that this activity improves everything about their children's lives, or not everything, but how well they do and what they can achieve. And they like it that they bring back. I mean, we get comments that say, you know, she brought back this information and she taught her sisters, and people seem to like that. And you know, Emily talked about trust. Well, in 2007, 26% of the parents that we surveyed said they trusted us, and by 2017 it was 74%. Yeah. This is not something that happens overnight. It takes many years of hard work and listening. You know, always assuming that I mean, for me, I mean, it's different for Emily because she's a Ugandan, but for me, who's not a Ugandan, the listening part is the hardest thing, because it's really easy to think you know best.
Yeah, but look, what an amazing change. I mean, to go from such a low level of trust to 74%, that's more than commendable. That is amazing.
That's our best result. I mean, we do endless evaluations of knowledge and attitude and behavior and all that kind of stuff, but that is definitely our best result.
Absolutely.
Because without it, we can't do any of the other stuff effectively.
Yeah. Well, that, you need stakeholder buy-in. You need everyone in the community to work together. It can't be an outside force telling them what to do. You have to have that mutual respect and trust. So we have someone in the chat asking how climate change has affected this habitat in this region.
Emily, okay. Well, I do. So the answer is it has. Emily will. I haven't been there for 2 years, so I don't know. But my understanding is that what people are saying is it's getting wetter. Is that right, Em? And hotter. And it seems like, there used to be clear, dry, hot and dry and wet seasons. But you can't, is that right, Emily? You can't really depend on that anymore, can you?
It's not there anymore because June, the dry season used to begin from June to August, and now, the rain start in June and go through November. It's been pouring down with rain. November is like the peak of it all. So yeah.
So I mean, it's a huge challenge for local farmers because their crops don't ripen. Don't ripen. The seeds rot in the fields. There are parts of Uganda where Emily's mother lives which have become drier. So that's a huge issue. And there's at one time there was a real belief that the forest was important for climate around the park. That it helped with rainfall. But I'm not sure that anyone wants any help with rainfall anymore. It seems to rain a lot. And we've really noticed that through our bee project because we're tracking temperature and rainfall alongside activity. And what these chips do is they measure humidity and temperature inside the hive. And healthy bees maintain consistent humidity and temperature. When they're weak and they're not and hungry and not doing well, then they can't do that. They can't maintain the temperature in the hive, and then the babies die. So that's the sort of measure of health. So I think a lot of rain is really bad for the bees. It's bad for the honey. It's bad for the elephants.
Humans.
Yeah, well, it affects everything, and it affects quality of life everywhere too. Which, as
so
you
some
said,
sort of climate resilient agriculture would probably be a good idea, but I don't know. Emily's mother won't plant cassava that does better because it doesn't taste right. So people have
absolutely. That's a whole different project to create change in what to eat.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you got to balance what people want and what people are willing to do with what maybe works best. There's a lot of competing interests. So we have someone in the chat asking about the crayons for Kibale Project, or the kind of fundraiser that we did last year. Emily, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, that was really wonderful. Again, it came up in, what were we talking about, Sarah? We had a meeting of sorts, and I was talking about the challenges.
You were a featured speaker at the Elephant Managers Conference last year, and you were talking about the challenges of, pivoting with COVID and how conservation education had to move outside of the classroom.
Yeah, and the International Elephant Foundation offered to do a campaign, and it was huge. We received a lot of crayons and sets because the crayons are used by the lower classes, but as they advance, they need real pens and sets to do their work. And
she means geometry sets. We don't call them that, Emily.
So someone brought them out in, was it August or September?
Yes, one of the problems was we had them, but we couldn't get them out because it was too expensive to send them. But we had to wait till somebody who was coming out and could bring them as hand luggage. And I think we actually might have a couple of boxes still in my basement that haven't gone yet, but hopefully there'll be more people going out in January and and we can get them out there. I mean, one of the things that we did during COVID the first year was we had already done a lot of radio broadcasts in Uganda. That's a sort of a chief means of communication, and people find out about meetings and when schools are going to start and all that sort of stuff through their radios. And so we started doing radio broadcasts on conservation and health, so that we were already set up so that when we went into 2020, we could shift our programs, a lot of our conservation programs, onto the radio. And while we couldn't determine who was listening, we could actually had a much bigger audience, because we could reach like 30,000 people with those programs. And then we added on to that with storytelling competitions and art and stuff. And it was there that we needed these crayons and pencils. And so these children often don't have writing implements. So, and paper, getting it out into the
But the crayons have gone on to help, and pens, because with the second lockdown, government started distributing educational materials. Well, in this district, for example, the district education department told us they didn't have money to distribute the education materials to the kids. So we got funding to distribute to kids from our schools. And so they needed the crayons and the pens. So the money was just enough to distribute to the higher classes, but we were able to distribute, coloring books and stuff like that for the lower classes with the crayons to also keep them engaged. And they are coming in numbers. I mean, I sit in office and the kid comes and says, my name was not in the list. I missed my work. They're really excited about it.
So they're doing this, I mean, nothing to do with me, but they're doing this amazing job distributing these packages of educational material and workbooks and conservation information and a weekly storytelling, and they're going out to 5,000 kids every 2 weeks. I mean, mounds and piles of photocopied stuff. And it's all done on a sort of distribution where it goes to one point and then everybody comes in on motorbike taxis and takes it out to 173 villages. So this is a huge undertaking, and the International Elephant Foundation is helping us fund some of that as well. Because the idea is that hopefully some of this stuff that they're doing will actually help them once they go back to school, but the real thing is that they're engaged in school stuff and their parents are engaged in school again, and hopefully are less likely to, take them out and push them into the fields.
Well, I know I speak for all of IEF that we are so happy we were able to help and make that kind of difference, especially during the pandemic, when it seemed like it was even harder to bridge that kind of global distance. But we have another question in the chat. All right. Are financial contributions the best way to support your work, or is there something else that would help you greatly?
Well, of course, financial contributions are always wonderful, and if they're unrestricted, that's even better. Telling your friends is probably the best thing you can do. Is set up a network of friends and supporters on a regular basis. All this is very expensive. I mean, this whole educational support program has cost $50,000, and it's only 4 months. And we're, as everyone, we're always looking for money, and those organizations that are supported a lot by zoos have suffered because the zoos haven't had any money because nobody's been going to the zoo. So a lot of those grant programs have stopped, and yes, money. I mean, donating stuff is great too, like the crayons for Kibale. And often if you're working with children, that's really great because kids want to give stuff. And we always have, as long as nobody minds that it might take 6 months or so to get stuff out there, because we have to wait till students, in a normal year, we have so many students coming out to work with us and to work with the chimps that we can give them a couple of extra bags and it's not an issue, but right at the moment, it is. And of course, sometimes it's better to have the money and you buy the materials in the country, but the issue there is that the quality tends to be poor. Right, Emily?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I remember once somebody giving us crayons and markers, and I thought, what's the point of these? There aren't very many of them. I mean, we've got 10,000 kids in our program. How are we going to use these? And what happened was the teachers used them, and they used them to make their, educational supplements and their little pictures and their posters and things. Good quality paper and nice quality markers, and they could do great educational materials with it. So sometimes it's good to have, it's always good to have money, but it's also good to have stuff as well.
Well, as someone in our chat said, clearly this work is a marathon and not a sprint, which I think that's very true. And I think you guys are doing amazing work in this marathon, and we are very, very happy to have you and to be able to support you over the years. So I don't think we have any more questions, and we are coming up on about an hour, so that's kind of our time limit anyway. So let's have everyone give you a big round of applause, because we are so grateful for both of you and all the work you're doing and the huge impact that you're making. We believe in you, and we believe in the conservation education work that you are doing. So big round of applause for Elizabeth and Emily. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
Just as by way of announcement for IEF, we have an upcoming virtual symposium soon. It's going to be November, I think, 15th through the 19th, and it'll happen via Zoom. Keep a look on our social media and our website for how to register and how to participate. We are very excited, and we will keep having more fantastic events like this for everyone to see. And you guys are getting all kinds of accolades in the chat. People saying we appreciate you taking the time and your stories and your struggles. Everyone's saying how informative and wonderful this was. So thank you so much. And yes.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yes, it was a pleasure.
It was great.
Thank God for the internet staying stable throughout.
Yeah, I mean, we have this new internet in our office in Uganda, and look how wonderful it is.
It is, yeah. Great.
It's fantastic. I love it. Debbie, Julie, do you have any other comments or?
Well, go ahead, Debbie.
I was just going to say, no, just thank you. And we are honored to support you and partner with you in your efforts. And just thank you. It was wonderful. Fantastic.
Yes. Thank you very much. It was a great presentation, and we learned so much. And I'm just so excited to see so many people out here today. We had a lot of donors and people from zoos and other places all over the country. So thank you for tuning in with us. And I also want to put in a plug for our upcoming International Elephant Foundation Symposium, which is going to be taking place November 15th through 19th. And so if you would like to learn more about that, there's information on our website. And I believe that the sign-up link for that is live currently. Am I correct in saying that, Sarah and Debbie?
I think it's going to go live in the next day or so.
Okay. All right. So please watch our website for more information on that. And if you have questions about it, just feel free to email me. I think everyone on this call should have my email. So you know how to get a hold of me if you have any questions on anything that might come up after we get off the call. So that said, I guess we will just wrap for today and just watch your inbox for future conservation chats with us.